Hi, I'm Eric Ostro, host of Live at the Lortel. For Season 3, we are focusing on the intersection of arts and advocacy. So many off-Broadway artists give back to their communities. This season, we are giving them the opportunity to speak about how and why they chose the causes they devote themselves to, and how those causes help make them the people and artists they are today. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Ostro, one of the hosts of Live at the Lortel. I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. I'd like to bring on our co-host, my dear friend and co-host for the evening, Joy DeMichelle. Joy.
Hello, Eric.
Hello, my darling. You look beautiful as always.
Thank you. So do you.
Oh, thank you. It took a long time. Okay, so I'm going to do a little intro. Our guest tonight, I'm very excited to have because we don't have that many designers on. Clint Ramos is a designer, educator, advocate, and creative producer who has designed sets and or costumes for more than 200 theater, opera, and dance productions. He is the recipient of a Tony Award for Best Costume Design of a Play for Eclipsed, making him the first person of color to win that category. He has 3 other Tony nominations for costume design and 1 for scenic design. He is also the recipient of 2 Obie Awards, 3 Lucille Lortel Awards, a Drama Desk Award, an Outer Critics Circle Award, 2 American Theater Wing Henry Hughes Awards, amongst many other honors. He is a producing creative director for Encores at New York City Center and serves on the American Theater Wing's advisory committee. Clint is a lifelong advocate for an equitable landscape in theater and film for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and for the rights of immigrants. We'll talk with him today about design, action, and everything else. Please welcome someone I admire so much, Clint Ramos.
Hi, friends.
Hello.
Welcome.
How are you?
Oh, I'm good. It's finally spring in New York, so it's been great. It was actually quite warm today, so yeah.
That's nice to hear. Really nice to hear. It's time that we had some sort of change.
Uh-huh. How are you folks?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm in
doing
Los
very
Angeles,
well,
so it's
especially
nice and
because
hot.
today we have you. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. I'm a big fan, and
thank you.
I want to start with unfortunately, Into the Woods just closed. That was your last show that you just closed and finished. Fantastic production.
Yes.
But it was a little bittersweet because we just lost Sondheim.
Yes.
And I know Sondheim, is involved in pretty much, if it's in New York, he's
Yes.
there and involved. What was it like working on a show where he wasn't a part of it? He wasn't around, at least, for the past few months.
It was profound. I think we all I don't think there was a moment where we actually were not sort of carrying his spirit. James Lapine came to first rehearsal and was very present throughout the rehearsal process. And, I think it was good that we, because we had been planning this season for 2 years now, since Leo and I started our leadership tenure at City Center. So Steve was pretty much, very involved in the planning process. And so, it was profound. It was, we hope we did him proud, but we also, we celebrated the body of work that he gave to us in a way by this production. The last the last show that I worked on with Steve that was through Encores was Sunday in the Park with George, and he was very involved. Like I remember him asking me questions about the costumes because I was the designer for that. But yeah, no, I think it was it didn't necessarily feel sorrowful, but it felt very, it felt very solemn. It felt very sort of spiritual in a way, and celebratory, like we celebrated his life.
When you did work with him and he would ask you questions about costumes or whatever, what was Steve like to work? Steve, like he's my good friend. What was Mr. Sondheim like when he would approach you and ask you questions and have conversations about costumes and sets, etc.?
I mean, he was pretty direct and not, I don't mean that in a sort of negative way. He was very succinct. He asked questions about, I had sort of, taken a pretty much an abstract departure for the clothes for Sunday in the Park. And, he had questions about the sources of that, and then, it was extremely smart, and he understood what the references were, and so it was a great conversation. It never felt like he was giving me any sort of notes or anything. It was really very, it came from a place of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And
there was never no, that's not going to work. No,
never. I
never
experienced that, at least.
Oh, thank God. At least you didn't. Right.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So in your experience of working and being almost always the only when it's time to accept awards and get the accolades, what has that been like for you to step into a space where you don't see very many other people that look like you, or you're the first? What is that feeling like, and what is your hope for the future? Do you see yourself getting more firsts, or do you see yourself wanting to see the end of the firsts because there's so many other people of color that are stepping and being into the space and being appreciated as well?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question. Being the first carries so many things, right? Like I think on one hand, I'm very proud that we've sort of broken that film, right? Like that sort of barrier. On the other hand, you kind of realize how long it took. For me, I have hope that we as an industry can keep on moving forward, right? I think our commitment to this is a daily practice. The way I look at it, it ought to be a daily practice, right? And to answer your first question, what is it like to walk into spaces? It's a combination of things. It feels you feel very alone, and you feel like the work. You feel like there's so much work that one does even before the work happens, right? Because I think one of the things that I keep on saying is there's such a profound amount of effort to position yourself, to negotiate your presence, the presence of your body in a space where you're the only one, right? Or you're one of a few. That's a lot of labor, right? And that happens even way before the real work happens, So in a way, it is exhausting, right? But I do hold hope. I think I hold hope because I believe that we are here to tell stories, and that was our primary commitment. And I think to that end, we're moving towards telling everybody's stories, but yeah, no, it's both profoundly sad and also hopeful, in a way, you know.
Mm. You're in such a phenomenal position where you are production designer, you're costume designer. For all the people who are listening, and particularly the young students that are listening, because we have a lot of students that listen in as well, can you kind of give us a roadmap of how you got there? Because, this is not like overnight success, right? So, how did your start happen, and any words of advice for people who are looking to walk in your footsteps?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you the cliff notes of my journey. I was born and raised in the Philippines. And my first exposure to theater was through political street theater. I grew up under the Marcos regime, which is a very oppressive regime, um, and sadly, the Philippines is going back to that family. Um, uh, so I learned about theater being I was 11 when I first encountered it. A drama teacher said, "Would you like to come to one of these, performances?" And I didn't know that that was actually a protest, right? Like, and so, but I fell in love with the power of the theater. We performed these short allegorical pieces, and they were short because we were afraid. And most of the time, if you go too long, the riot police would come and disperse you with water cannons, right? And so I saw firsthand the power of how performance and theater could actually uh, move people in a way that shifts their perspective in life, right, and shifts their philosophies. And later on, I saw how that contributed to the revolution. So I come from a place where I actually believe in the theater as a catalyst for change, right? And so, and when I moved to America,
Wait, I want to ask one
yeah,
quick question. I want to jump back. So you had a teacher that asked you to be a part of the little theater that you put on.
yeah,
And where was that? Obviously, you
yeah,
guys were protesting
yeah, in Manila.
in squares in Manila.
Yeah,
Okay.
in town squares, business districts. My job would be to hold this bamboo pole, right, with the red
Hmm.
flag, and that sort of would signal folks, people to gather around because there would be a pop-up performance there, and they were allegorical pieces, like thinly veiled, like little fables. There was one piece that was about a vampire sucking people's blood, and but that was, you know what I mean? That was like and so yeah, no, that was it. Happened in those spaces where we would do it in lunch hours or after work, where people were going home. So just to remind them, it was another way of, it was counter propaganda in a way.
And they would come after you with these enormous water
Cannons, yeah,
cannons.
and
Mhm.
disperse you, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
And that's if you went too long, or if it
Yeah, if you
was
went too long, because they
completely out of if you stepped too far, was that it?
well, we were already stepping too far, right? Like any
Okay.
sort of form of protest or anything like that, or any sort of like public assembly. Remember, this is, like a very sort of oppressive regime. You're just counting on the amount of time somebody tipped them, tip the cops, or the riot police, and the time it would take for them to come and disperse us. So that would be around 10 to 12 minutes. Like if you go 12 minutes, you're in like you would,
Mhm.
you would start feeling really, panicky.
Mhm,
Yeah, yeah.
mhm. And so
So go
then you
ahead with
moved
your
to the
story. I'm
States?
sorry. Hmm.
As I moved to the States, and and then I encountered a very sort of different kind of theatrical system, but also like I moved to the States, and all of a sudden I was brown, right?
Mm.
I came from a homogenous country, and so, at least racially, right? And so, there were a lot of things that I had to negotiate. So, and then the biggest thing that I could say is that I found a mentor. People of color opened doors for me. What I feel like I'm doing now is literally what has been done to me, and I do it not, not because of any altruistic thing, but it was because it was done to me. Uh, Plain and simple. George Wolfe came and saw my work and said, come here. I couldn't get any work. George Wolfe said, "Come to the public theater and do work here," right? And the very early, years of my career, I didn't really get the people who would hire me were people of color, and particularly Black folk. And I'm going to put a really fine point on that because, I think a lot of that is because in terms of the work of color there, Black folk were ahead, right? And so, but also, I felt like they had offered a home to me, right? Like they were like, okay, you can practice your art here, right? And so that was basically how I just basically went where the love was, right? Like where, and I never dreamed of going to Broadway. I knew that my work was Broadway adjacent, or it was off Broadway or off of Broadway. Ellen Stewart was also a big sort of supporter. Like I would, sometimes like when I would be in between apartments, like she would let me sleep at La Mama, and so that's sort of like where my career path went, and then slowly I think people noticed my work off Broadway. Janine Tesori, created Off Center and said, "Hey, I loved what you did on Good Person of Szechuan. Would you come and be one of the principal designers for Encore's Off Center?" And from there, Violet happened, and all of that happened. But I would say, if because your original question was, what would what would be the piece of advice I would give to younger folk, is particularly younger folk who come from a sort of marginalized, underrepresented section. I would just say, go where the love is, and that really that means seek out people who value the things that you value. Seek out people whom you may have you may have the same lived experience with, and seek out people who feel passionate about the things that you feel passionate about. And I was very lucky, because I didn't have a roadmap after grad school. I did not have a roadmap when my classmates were being hired for this job and that job. I didn't know what to do, and so I was very lucky that I had mentors who knew what I was going through, and sort of took me under their wing. And I think that's very important in terms of mentorship. I think there are so many well-meaning folks who want to mentor, but I think there's a section of that particular young artist's life that is impervious to some mentors, and I think it's important to be porous to that.
Mm.
I agree. As you talk about Broadway, I definitely want to talk about slave play. I can't talk about your Tony nominated set without talking about the mirror.
Yeah.
In the play that you used. And I happened to go see it. I saw it twice, but the first time I saw it, I had no expectations. I really didn't know what it was or what I was seeing.
Mm.
And we were sitting in the front row.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, front row, right there.
Mm-hmm.
How did this mirror idea come to you?
Oh, it was sort of circuitous, I got a call from my long-term collaborator, actually a text, Robert O'Hara, and he said, there's this kid, he's still at Yale, and he wants me to do this. I have a read, so I read it on the train, and I said, I texted him immediately after I read it, and I said, I don't know what I just read, but like I feel all sorts of feelings about it, and so the mirrors came really from meetings with Jeremy and Robert. They had both different desires for what they wanted in the play, none of which were physically possible, right? Robert wanted to do it in the round, and I couldn't reposition the seats at New York Theater Workshop because we started at New York Theater Workshop. And Jeremy wanted it to be sort of like fully immersed in a real plantation, or as close as we could get. He mentions the word verisimilitude in the script. None of those directives were possible, right? And so I had to sort of like go beyond the desire and see what was the spirit behind those desires, right? And for Robert, it was about intimacy. It was about being able to look at these people and the actors, I mean, and the performers in a way where you understood their humanity, but also, moreover, it was about the performers and the actors being that close to the audience so that they can actually also negotiate the terms of how they're performing it in front of them. Right. So that was important to Robert. In a way, it was about keeping the actors safe. Right. And for Jeremy, it was really this desire of like a historical contextualization of how to place bodies inside a plantation, and so I set all of those things aside, and I kind of like did a bunch of research, and just like a lot of research really. And that's sort of my favorite part, is you kind of like you get caught up and you lose yourself, you get consumed by this rabbit hole of research. And I saw this photograph of Michelle Obama at the Venice Biennale. And it seemed to me that she was inside this mirror room, right? She was looking at this projection in a mirror. And I thought, and I put a bookmark on that in my mind. And simultaneously, I was also looking, because we know what slave play is, I was also looking at how one would perform intimacy, right? And I was looking at a lot of like bedrooms, like intimate bedrooms, and a lot of these bedrooms had mirrors up above the bed, and so it clicked. I think to me, it just made like it was very quick. It, like I said, oh gosh, I can do this. I can create this theater in the round for Robert through mirrors, right? But through reflection, and I actually could place these bodies inside a plantation. And I thought, if there is one thing that would represent sort of a bastion of white culture, it would probably be the American theater, right? And so in a way, by reflecting the audience, who most of the time were white, right? Reflecting the sort of like the en masse, the people who actually consume plays, and placing the play in that visually, like not even philosophically, but like really placing it in that, we may be able to replicate that feeling of displacement. Like, I don't know what this space is, like, why am I here, But also, I think with plays like that, with any sort of like play, I suppose, we always, as a designer, we have an opportunity to sort of calibrate how much we're indicting the audience, right? And I think that's important, right? Like for me, I wanted each member of that audience to look at their reflection and see how they're complicit, because each one of us, from black, white, or anything in between, are part of that system. And how are we? So to me, it's a chance to sort of look at yourself and examine your position in that system.
And that's exactly what happened. I mean,
good.
Yeah, I mean, to see yourself, and I felt like my friend that I was with, I was like, first of all, get your feet off the stage, and second of all, we were the other characters in this play. Is what was my feeling about it.
Yes, because for me, regardless of how you feel about the play is polarizing in terms of like, and I won't even get to that, because like that's something that Jeremy and Robert can probably be more eloquent about. The question for me is, in seeing your reflection, one gets the opportunity to ask oneself, well, why am I here? Why am I watching this?
I'm so thrilled about having you here today. I'm trying to figure out how to ask this. So, the last scene in Slave Play,
yes,
when she is clothed and he is not.
Yes.
Can you talk about how you as the wardrobe, the costume designer, and also as
I didn't do the costumes. Didier Ite did the costumes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, what was the storytelling intention with the dynamic of him being naked, which is being naked is the most vulnerable
Yes.
position you can be
Yes.
in, and her being clothed, however, being the one who
Was violated.
is, yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you
I
talk about that storytelling?
I'm sure there's like a multiplicity of versions if you ask each person of the creative team and that, you know. And for me, the way I looked at that was, you know, well, yeah, it was about vulnerability also, right? And it was about being completely devoid of any trappings, right? As far as far as that particular character is concerned, right? And yet not being able to hide because of the sort of like, you literally, because we've pivoted the mirrors now to create this sort of coliseum, right? And it was inescapable, right? And to me, then in that state, you know, in that state, any sort of theater goer can make a judgment of whether or not, can make a pure judgment, right? Because in a way, you physically stripped him. You physically stripped that character. And how does he now place himself in the narrative? And what is your point of view on that? I think to me, that was sort of the biggest point, right? While she, being clothed, still can step into the narrative and still have in a way, this Brechtian distancing from it, right? Like in a way say, hey, this is the story, this is the play, this is the thing, right? So now in these two sort of juxtapositions, place your judgment on it, right? And I don't think the play is trying to convince anybody. Again, you know, this is my own thing. You know, I'm sure Jeremy has a very sort of eloquent response to that. I don't think the play is asking for one sort of monolithic opinion, right? Like I think what I know what the play is asking for is a dialogue, right? And that dialogue can be as passionate as possible, or it can be sort of as philosophical as possible, right? Like and spark a conversation that I think, in a way, when we talk about race in America, and you juxtapose that. It always becomes sort of this lofty thing. We have, I think, for us, a tendency to separate ourselves and look at it clinically, right? Like we look at systems, we study the systems, right? And even sort of the most, I think, prolific liberal-minded people would look at race through systems, right? But I think what the play gives us is an opportunity to actually look at it very much in a very unadulterated, intimate way, where id is the driving force of the conversation. You know, yeah.
I have a question, a design question about it, and Rihanna. You know, with slave play, the mirrors became the thing people were talking about. But I want to hear about kind of the physicalization of the Rihanna lyrics. I mean, it fascinated me, and I couldn't stop thinking about the lyrics were an actual physical part of the play.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, how do you? And I couldn't get that out of my mind. I mean, it literally came to life.
Yeah.
How did you go about that?
Well, if you read the play, right, he writes out the lyrics, right? He writes out the lyrics, and I've always been fascinated both by the dialect that was being used, but also like he could have easily just said, Rihanna's work is playing here, right? But he actually, you know, so to me,
it was very specific.
It was very specific, and it made me think about how, through Kanisha's lens, or through Kanisha's oral, you know, world, Rihanna appears, or the music appears when she feels most oppressed, right? When she feels most, that sort of her neurotic tendencies to go to that song, right? And that appears as a leitmotif. And to me, it was really sort of like this obvious thing, right? And it was the last element I added to the set, because I looked at the set for many like iterations, and I'm like, there's something missing, you know, there's just something missing. And to me, I said, you know, well, why don't we, let's try through a set model, through a little like maquette, let's try just physicalizing the lyric, right? And that particular lyric. nobody is righteous is the lyric. And then it became clear to me that we can use it, as a punctuation or an obvious representation of her neurosis, right? And so in at the end of Act 2, when she screams after the group therapy session, when she screams because she's hearing the music, we have the sort of the lyric going downstage and actually almost hitting them, right? Like it's just like kind of like it breaks the action, but it also graphically it became like almost like a palate cleanser, right? Like between the acts. And so, I was excited about that. We sort of like, we tested it a couple of times, and, it was exciting. Although, I still feel like we could have gone a little faster when it dropped, but, Broadway wouldn't let us do that.
But it was innovative. It was something I hadn't ever seen on stage before. The physicalization of those Rihanna lyrics that, were coming at me, and inside of her.
Yeah.
That's who I felt very much connected to it. And I just want to give you your kudos to that. And
thank you. Thank you.
How you can take something like the lyrics of the show and make them, and the physicality of it was so incredible. It blew me away.
Yeah, thanks. Sometimes design has to be obvious,
Yeah, I guess so. And at the same time, that year you were working on costumes for the Rose Tattoo.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, you had 2 shows. You were doing costumes for Rose Tattoo, and you were doing a set for the Slave Play. And you got a nomination for both that year.
Yeah, and I did Grand Horizons too that year.
Oh, and Grand Horizons, which I loved.
With a truck crashing into that living room.
Oh, well, Jane Alexander, period.
Period. End of story. Yeah.
Phenomenal show.
Yeah.
What is your approach of? I mean, I know they were happening at different times, but they were kind of happening at the same time.
Yes, they were.
What is your approach to working on costumes and then working on set? I mean, do you have assistants around you? Are you,
yes.
up at night? Are you up 24/7, sketching and then working over here? I mean, that's an incredible amount of work for one person to be working on these 3 shows.
Yes to all.
Okay.
It's reply all. Yes, I am very fortunate that I have, I'm supported very well by my associates, by my assistants. But I think also that season I couldn't have done it if we did. Both of those shows were essentially transfers, right? We had done Rose Tattoo at Williamstown with Marissa, and then we had done Slave Play at New York Theater Workshop. And so in a way, the I wouldn't have been able to do that if they were like original shows, or like shows that we, yeah. But it requires a lot. It requires, a lot of moving parts, Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Joy.
Okay. So thank you. So after doing this, you jumped right. How did you transition into Respect? Tell us how that happened.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Respect happened because Liesl Tommy, who was also a longtime collaborator, we were fellows at New York Theater Workshop. They had a fellowship of color in the early aughts, and we were recipients of that. Tracy Scott Wilson was also one of the fellows there, and we had formed. And this is an example of go where the love is, right? We had formed really close friendships, and sort of they were my support system, and we were each other's support system. I think a lot of times, and this is another piece of advice that I would give young folks, is that you find your people, because there will be times where you will be in spaces, that you may not have people with you. And there will be times that what you're feeling may be invalidated because, or you may be doubting yourself. I'm like, am I right to feel this way? Am I right to feel this way? Or whatever happens there. But you have a group of people to call. to say, hey, I was feeling this way and this happened and this happened. You know what I mean? So that's all I'm gonna, say about that. Just find your people. And they asked me to do it. They asked me to say, hey, would you do it? It's, we're going to see it through a theatrical lens. And, our friends, Audra McDonald, Heather Hadley, Saquon Sangblow, everybody, the whole, like, it's going to be, is it Haley Kilgore, who I worked on Once on This Island with, Leroy McLean, are all going to be in it. And so I said, yes, it was a great opportunity. It was a great, it was, an amazing story by by an American icon, really. So I couldn't say no to it. So that's how that happened.
Do you, in terms of all the characters in that movie, do you take each character and break them down with their own, like, do you meet with all the actors?
Yes.
First you do your own research, then you meet with all the actors to discuss their own point of view with, Aretha, Dinah, Ted White, James Cleveland. I mean, all of those people.
Every single one.
So you do your own research and then you meet with all of them and then get their point of view.
Yes, all of it. Yes. It's just like what we do in the theater, right? But just like the scale is blown out, because there were scenes that we were costuming 1,000 people, there were church scenes and stadium scenes. But it goes through the same cycle. At least that's the way I did it, right? Like that's, I go through character research. I read as much as I could, did all the photographic research, went to Detroit, went to Atlanta, went to, and there's a lot of like research that a lot of photograph that's not online, right? A lot of these Black churches actually, they have they have photo albums, right? And that's, they it hasn't been scanned or anything. So they have a repository of photographs from the, from, I would say some of them from the 1920s, right? And they're there, like, of socials, of church socials, of like, every single thing. So you actually can see what folks were wearing, right? And so I was very lucky to have had access to that, on top of like all the fashion photographs, all of the whatever. And so, I did all of that research and then like had a meeting with each and every single actor before we even went into fittings and, before we even started building the clothes.
Wow. Fascinating. Amazing. What I always wanted to kind of ask, it's a kind of a silly question, but why, how come Aretha always had her handbag with her towards the end?
Oh, that's a very funny story
of her life.
It actually started in the 60s, It's about trust. It's about trust. If as we all know what her story is, right? And so it's really about, I think it's about trust. But I think the handbag in particular was about her insisting on being paid in cash. There was a period of time where she insisted on being paid in cash because she didn't trust the promoters or she didn't trust checks, that they would clear or anything like that, right? And so the cash would be inside the bag, which she would take on stage with her. So she had her eye, she had her. So that's how that
so she
happened.
Got paid even before she got on stage.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah, no, I'd probably do it for free. But I mean, in terms of, it's fascinating to me that, I remember watching some of the last concerts that she did, the week that she died, and seeing her, bring her fur coat on, and carrying a big handbag with her that did not look light. That thing looked heavy. So I was always fascinated about what is the deal. And she'd, take the coat off sometimes and then put the handbag on the piano, and she was not letting it out of her sight.
No, I mean, I'm sure through the latter years, there were like managers that, I think there were different financial arrangements, but I think the habit just kind of stuck.
Let's talk about design action.
Yes.
I was about to go right there.
Okay. Go ahead, Joy. Ask the question.
No. You just ask it. That's perfect. Perfect transition.
Oh, design action. Yes.
Design action. Sorry.
So design action. Yes. During the pandemic and during the sort of racial reckoning, we were not working, and so a bunch of designers and I, David Zinn. I'm gonna miss somebody. So I'm just gonna say David Zinn, Rachel Hauk, Jane Cox, Ricardo Hernandez, Danielle Worley, a mixed number of designers said, hey, what can we do to actually make a more equitable landscape for American theater design? There's a study that APAC does, the Asian American Performers Association, Alliance or Coalition, does almost every year, that's sponsored by the American Theater Wing, that actually does a study, a data study of off-Broadway and Broadway. It's almost like a tracking sort of diversity, right? They've not done any for the designers until during the pandemic. And Wilson Chin, the designer, sort of spearheaded that project. And we saw that of all the shows in the last 2 years on Broadway, before this year, of all the 370 jobs, something like 97% went to white people, to white designers. And so we all just like looked at that and said, well, how can we make that better? Both how can we sort of start at the root of it, which is sort of like the young folk, right? And also, how can we sort of affect change to make the embrace broader, right? Like, I think, one of the things that's always a misnomer, right, is that, we want white folks to like not work anymore. We want to take their jobs, and that's sort of like, it's really profound to me how this idea of the replacement theory is a lot of the conversation that's happening right now because of the Buffalo shootings, right? But that is sort of like, to call that sort of like, oh, this is a new thing that, but that this is an ethos that sort of like that undergirds emotions, right? But to us, we really look at it as like, when you make an equitable landscape, you're really just broadening that embrace. You're just letting more people in. Right, and so we formed the group, and we invited both sort of established designers and young designers and designers who were in school, and we started just talking, and that happened every Monday, almost every Monday for the last year of the for that year in the pandemic, and we talked about how we could make it better. We talked about actions that we could take. We talked about what is important to us. And mind you, this was a mixed room, right? We were both white and BIPOC designers. And what came out of that was sort of like these guiding principles that we kind of really believe in, and that we ask theaters to abide with, and also sort of programs, one of which is the Springboard to Design, which is co-underwritten by the American Theater Wing, and I'm going to put it in the chat, which is trying to get high school students to actually perhaps think about a career in design when they go to college, right?
Is it a website? If it is, you can. Hopefully, we can get it on the.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat. It's in the American Theater Wing website, and it's a 1 week free. It's a free intensive on design, and you got Broadway designers like sort of ridiculous.
There it is. We put it up.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
And it's a 1 week intensive for high school students, open to underrepresented high school students who like my path. My path was not straight to design. My path was like, oh, I might perform, I might like direct or whatever, right? But like I ended up in design, and that's sort of a traditional, like that's kind of a common path, right? Just sort of, and we've started this as a 1 week intensive, whether you have like this, all of these Broadway designers kind of like, giving workshops on what different areas and designs are. In that week, they get to see a Broadway show every night, and then we visit shops, we visit design studios. And then at the end of it, we actually have folks who teach at colleges, to like talk to them about what applying to sort of the design track of those colleges would be. So it's completely free. It happens in July. and please apply. Like, you have 2 more days to apply. So um, that's one of the things that we're doing. So really, that's what sort of design action is up to this moment.
That is very exciting, and I
Yes.
hope people take a look, and hopefully we'll put it up on the website.
Yeah.
And so for
I
those that
wanted
are,
to. Yeah, go
can
ahead,
we get
Joey.
that out for people who are listening? For those that are listening, it is americantheaterwing.org/program/springboard New York City /
NYC, right?
yes, NYC.
Before we let you go, I want to talk about a couple more things. I want to talk about the year you nominated for Once on This Island. Not so much the nomination, but your design for Once on This Island, which is my one of my favorite shows in the whole world. You layered your costumes featuring dresses inspired by flowers and armors made out of soda cans and headpieces from wire and glass shards, literally made, for the gods. What When they came to you and asked you to do this, is this something that you jumped at? I mean, did you know the show? Did you have any past experience with this show?
Um, I didn't have any past experiences with the
Okay.
show. Michael Arden
Hmm.
asked if I would join the team, and of course, I was very, very excited. Uh, it was through a longer sort of protracted process of collaborating with Michael and with Dane, our set designer, to sort of figure out a language, of how to tell this particular story. And we know that the folks who created the story were not necessarily they didn't necessarily look like or live the lives of the people of whom we're telling the
No.
story, right?
Mm-mm.
But to me, that became sort of a guiding kind of challenge. Is like, how can we actually, to the best that we can do, how can this literally seem like it's coming from the storytellers, right? Like that this theatrical performance is coming from the storytellers, right? And then we have to step back further and say, well, who are the storytellers, right? And what is the French Antilles? Like, where are we
Hmm.
locating this? And Michael really felt like we have to be unblinking about it. And this is where I like really have to give kudos to Michael Arden, because Michael Arden was like, no, it's Haiti. It is Haiti, and we have to present it like in the sort of most deferential but yes honest way of how to do that. And so through research, and visits to Haiti, like, we accumulated a lot of like things, and a lot of it was because of natural disasters, right? So we
Yeah,
just
that was.
we just kind of like layered all of that with the history of colonization in that country, how that country, was like, in a way, is set up to, there are failures that are set up, for that
Mhm.
country. And so I think a lot of that contributed to how I thought, if we start with an honest representation of like who the storytellers are, they are hurricane ravaged Haitians, right? And how out of this kind of like tragedy, right, or this sort of this disaster, how can we tell the stories from the things that are actually littered around them, right?
Right.
Number one. And why do they need to tell the story, right? And it's, to me, it was about survival. Like, I think that's how we as human beings, kind of survive. We tell stories,
Hmm.
either we buoy ourselves with stories to tell ourselves, or stories that we tell the community to sort of get us through the next day.
Mhm.
And that really was sort of the idea of the costumes, and just sort of the nitty gritty of it. Like, for instance, the way these storytellers transformed themselves into gods was about collecting stuff and putting it on them
Right.
so that they could they could tell a story from a God's point of view, you know.
Mhm.
And so that was really it was very organic in a way, and a lot of collaboration with the actors. You know, even the placement of Leia Salonga in that space was a
That's exactly what I
conversation.
was just going to ask about. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, we knew that Leia, was going to play Urzuli, the goddess of love. And Leia and I, we're both Filipino. So I've had like conversations about her character and where, how to do that. And in that conceit, we really dug deep, and she's like, how am I going to place my body in that predominantly black company, and we just like went through the research, and then one day, like, I saw this picture of a Filipina nurse doing work for Doctors Without Borders in
Mhm.
Haiti, right? And I said, Leia, look at this photograph, and that sort of like gave us the entree into how we could place her body in that space.
Wow. Yeah, there's, that moment I hadn't noticed. I saw it a few times, obviously, but, the stethoscopes that we see when we first meet the nurse, right?
Yeah,
And then it becomes the belt on the gown of
yeah,
Aruzali, right?
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, to me, you know, um, after a disaster, grabbing what you can to use to put on yourself or to make some beautiful something for yourself was an ingenious idea. I
right.
loved, I loved catching that. I don't know how many
Yeah.
people were able to catch that, but I loved that.
I'm so glad you caught that,
It
because
was so beautiful to see. I was like, "Oh, there's that," and here it is again. Oh, I see. I
yeah, yeah,
see.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And we layered it. We didn't like do one kapow, right? Like we
Right,
placed how many, like, she was distributing mosquito nets, right? Because a
right.
big product of, like, after a hurricane was malaria, right? And so this is what Doctors Without Borders does, and that mosquito netting essentially became her gown. So
Hmm.
yeah, Rizuli's
Yeah,
gown.
unbelievable. Um,
So, what is next for you? What do you have your sights set on right now?
Oh gosh.
doesn't have to be a
Well,
show. Just what do
yeah,
you?
no,
Yeah,
I think
I
I'm very serious about the new leadership position that Lear de Besonnet and Jenny Gersten and I have took on at Course. We love the American musical, and we are looking at how we can broaden that embrace. It is such an institution that is beloved, and so we've just finished our first season, and so I'm devoted to that, and I'm devoted to how, what the sort of how we can sort of radiate that mission, right, and make it meaningful to the most amount of people, particularly New York City, because New York City Center was built for the people of New York City. It was the People's Theater, and so I'm excited about that. I'm excited to keep on doing my advocacy work, because I was going to mention that I'm going to put this on the chat too, because it's AAPI Heritage Month, that we started the Emergency Transportation Fund, and this is for particularly off Broadway and off Broadway Asian American artists who feel unsafe going home at night.
Mhm.
Please apply for this fund. It gives you grants, so you're able to take Ubers, and Lyfts, or whatever car service you want to take from to and from rehearsal. So please, but yeah, I'm excited about that, and I'm excited to just keep on doing the work, and really hoping to how we can, all of us, can make the American theater better.
That is so important. A fund like that to help people get to and from rehearsal and to the grocery store or whatever, because of the hate and the beatings and the rapings and the way what's happening in the world right now with the hating on Asian people. We got to fix that. I mean, we we need resources and foundations like you've started to help people get to where they need to go and feel safe.
Yeah, it's very important, particularly because culturally Asians are not prone to saying something, you know. So, but within the community, we know that quite a number of people have already been either attacked or accosted on their way to work in the theaters, right?
Hmm.
And so, to whoever's listening out there, just like please, like apply. You know, these are grants, and you can reapply if you run out of funds. You know, so it's very important that we keep our API family safe. You know, the violence against Asian Americans have risen close to 400%. You know, during
Mm.
That's
the pandemic,
unbelievable.
and it hasn't waned, right? Yeah.
As conversations about diversity have been arising over the past, especially the past 2 to 3 years, I wonder what your thoughts are about representation in the theater behind the scenes. And I know we've been talking about it.
Yeah.
We hear more about diversity with actors and playwrights, but
Yeah.
rarely about designers. I see the Tonys, and it's a couple of years ago it was just white people nominated. What was that like? What's that like from your side? Um,
Yeah, I think, I think
is it turning?
it's hopeful. I think it's
Okay.
hopeful, right? I think it's hopeful, but I think I would urge all of us to do is think about how to make the process meaningful, right? So we just don't tick boxes, right? Like we just don't like, oh, you have to do your COVID test, and now you have to do your EDI test, and you have to do this, and we have to nominate this amount of thing. Like, while yes, I think sort of equitable representation is certainly about numbers, right? But it also is an opportunity for us to actually understand why we're doing that, and I think why equity is different from let's just say equality, right? Like equity is about getting everybody to be in the race at the same level, right? And
Hmm.
not all of us are actually starting at that same level. And so to me, it's an opportunity for us to make meaning out of it, right? Like, and I think that's what's missing for me right now, right? Like it becomes automatic. It becomes, and I'm not listen. If a team says, "Oh gosh, we got to get more people of color in here," I'm not mad about that. What I'm gonna say is that that's such an opportunity to make it meaningful, to ask why and why we're doing it, and all of that. Like I think it becomes less of I think I want it to become a cultural practice, right? And the other thing that I was going to say is that all of us, right? Everybody, not just like people of color, all of us we have to hold ourselves accountable. And that means that you actually ask questions. And that means you actually say something when you see something, and that means that you actually question, you actually critique, right? You actually do that because, and the reason why I say this is because I think a lot of us are afraid, right? But for me, I love the American theater so much that I actually reserve the right to critique it. It reminds me of what Baldwin said, right, about
Mm.
America, right? Like I think for us to hold ourselves accountable every day to each other is actually a form of love. To me, accountability is love. And I think that's what I'm going to say about equity in the American theater.
I think that makes perfect sense. You're also head of design and production, scenic and costume at Fordham University.
Actually, no, I no longer am.
Okay.
Yeah. Mark Wendland, our friend Mark Wendland, is actually, I think he's acting head of design there. So yes, no, I stepped down from my position last year.
We'll cut that out of the podcast. I beg your
Yeah.
pardon. I did not know that. I didn't know that you stepped down, but
Yes, I'm so sorry. I should
no,
probably
that's
like
okay. Don't.
see. This is why you're so awesome because you started
It's no
so
big.
early and you got a bio that was like not updated.
It was not. That's okay. Um, so as we were saying, and you were saying you're hopeful, which is great. The great Jocelyn Bio, who I love.
I love Jocelyn.
Uh,
I was just with her on
uh,
Sunday. Yeah,
what a great playwright and actor and everything.
yeah.
And I asked her that same question. What does it feel like now? Do you feel a turn of any kind? And she said she looks at it like this enormous, enormous ship, the biggest ship you'll ever be on in your life. And when you make a turn on that
You
ship,
don't feel it.
you don't feel it.
Yeah. She's 100% accurate. That is one of the most eloquent things I've ever heard.
Yeah.
You know, it's making a turn and you don't feel it. And for me, I have no choice to but be hopeful.
Mm.
You know, I love the theater so much, right? And it has actually, my friends are from the theater. It has saved me, you know, so much. So from so many things, it has actually been like a lifeline for me. So I have no choice but to be hopeful that it will be better. It's incomprehensible for me to not love it, you know.
You know, you
I
said
couldn't agree more.
go to where the love is.
Yeah.
And it is, I really believe that like attracts like. And I wouldn't necessarily say you had to go to where it was. I would say you attracted it. You are just such a beautiful, beautiful spirit that it is so evident that anybody would see your work and feel your presence and say, that's somebody I want to work with. So thank you so much for coming and spending time with
Yeah.
us.
Oh, it's been
That's
a
a
pleasure.
that's a light that I want a little bit of.
Mhm.
Thank
That
you for
is for
having
sure.
me and for this, you know, for an opportunity to
Thank
actually
you for
do these
coming
plugs.
on. Clint, you are we all look up to you and really admire your work um, through your art and through your advocacy. And this is exactly what we're looking for now in artists. So thank you.
Well, thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Um, that is our show. We are halfway through AAPI Heritage Month, but only have one more show left in our third season. Next Monday, May 23rd, Joy and I will wrap up season 3 with a special 2 p.m. interview with Shannon Tayo. Shannon is just coming off her big Lucille Lortel Award win for Outstanding Lead Performer in a Play for the Chinese Lady. Incredible play.
Ah,
Ah, amazing. And she's amazing. I want to thank all of our listeners this season. We hope you have enjoyed the conversations as much as we have. To get updates, please visit liveathelortel.com. Excuse me, liveathelortel.com and join our mailing lists. And we hope you can join us next Monday at 2. Thank you for listening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being a part of season 3 and for being a part of change. And thank you, Clint, for
thank you.
your light and helping us get to that place. Stay safe, wear a mask still, I think, and go to the theater, ladies and gentlemen. The theater is open.
That's right.
You have to wear a mask. Patty Lupone will not yell at you. Just get to the theater. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful night. We'll see you next week. Good night.